Joining us now is Tony Gosling to take us back to our top story, where the Russian foreign minister says that Moscow supports the full implementation and the quick revival of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the JCPOA. He made the remarks during a joint press conference with his Iranian counterpart in Moscow. And now joining us from Bristol is Tony Gosling, investigative journalist. Hello, Tony. Pleasure to check in with you. And now, Tony, we got a lot of Western media accounts saying that it's the Russians that are making excessive demands right now, saying that in order for the JCPOA to get revived, that they want certain guarantees from Washington, that the new sanctions against Moscow will be exempted when it comes to Moscow's trade with Iran. Moscow is saying that is not the case. We want a revival of the JCPOA as soon as possible. What are we supposed to make of the conflicting stories here, Tony?
Well, it does rather complicate things, doesn't it? Having the massive sanctions piling onto Russia from the West. And of course, the United States, in their own mind, they see themselves as the rulers of the world. And so when they put sanctions onto one country, that means that other countries are not allowed to trade with that country either. Otherwise, the United States insists on sanctions on the third country. And I'm afraid this is not really winning hearts and minds around the world. The United States trying to dictate terms to all these other countries. A similar thing, of course, has been going on previously with sanctions on Iran, where, for example, if a European Union country trades with Iran, the United States threatens that country, it threatens the company through legal means who's been dealing, such as Airbus was, with Iran. And I'm afraid, being the bullies of the world, I mean, it used to be the British Empire that were the bullies of the world, but the United States seemed to be doing it absolutely shamelessly in full public view. And so whether the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which I call the most important piece of paper on the planet, which is most important in stopping any kind of, basically stopping a Middle Eastern war, which would be completely disastrous and drag the superpowers in probably, that it's very important that this does get signed. And maybe the conflict between Washington and Moscow, which is, I don't personally believe that the Ukrainian President Zelensky has got very much clout at all. He's reading a script written in Washington. And so it looks to me as if this conflict could actually tip the balance and get the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, re-signed. And it would be lovely if that was the case, because I think it's probably the most, like I said, the most important document on the planet. But if you look at the sanctions regime, the problem here is, of course, that without Russian oil and without Russian gas, Europe and the United States start to collapse as economies. And so they've had to reach out to other potential suppliers, such as Iran, and last week Venezuela, in order to fill that gap. And what this tells me is that there doesn't seem to be much of a plan from the NATO, EU, Washington side in the Ukraine conflict, and that they're now having to tear up potential conflicts that they had, which is, of course, potentially a good thing.
I mean, when you look at the sanctions regime, to your point, there are contradictions. You're going after another adversary or a couple of adversaries to try to compensate for sanctions you've imposed on a new adversary. Well, not a new adversary, but you know what I mean. And not only that, aside from all that, the sanctions are going to hurt the West and their allies and the East just as much as they're going to hurt Tehran and Moscow, aren't they?
Well, I actually think that they're going to hurt Europe and the United States more because Iran and Russia have been, and of course China, which is a massive economic powerhouse, they are much better at they're more self-sufficient, shall we say, because you, for example, there in Tehran have had a lot of opportunity to ensure that you're able to manufacture goods locally, you're able to get them from other parts of the world, and you're not reliant on dealing with the West. But I'm afraid the West is very much reliant on dealing with the rest of the world, and by cutting off from Russia, I mean, the thing with energy, right, and this is the major problem with Europe particularly, and the United States too, not buying oil and gas from Russia, is that the energy price hikes as the energy prices go up, as the demand is increased, the supply is decreased, the demand is increased, the prices go up. This hits everything. Everything in the markets get hit by increased energy prices. And also, not only the businesses, but the homeowners and people at home are also hit hard. I mean, we here in Britain have just had a 50% increase in our gas prices and electricity prices. We've also got a 100% interest in the increase in the standing charges. So that's the charge you have to pay every month or whatever, just to get an electricity wire into the house. And this is going to cause a much more of a ill effect on the West than it is on the countries that are supposed to be being sanctioned here. But I think also at the moment we've got the potential of a deal with Iran, and also, of course, the potential for the return of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe to Britain, which is also, I'm quite sure, part of the negotiations going on, for example, between the British Foreign Office and your own government right now, in order to try and get this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, re-signed. This is, I'm afraid, where we are, with individual personalities being arrested in countries and then them being used almost as a pawn. Like, for example, Julian Assange is a very big pawn that the UK has to do deals with the United States. And it's appalling, I think, to see individuals treated like this, their own cases being used almost like a bargaining chip around the world. We have also, of course, Meng Wanzhou from Huawei, the Chinese lady who was arrested in Canada, recently released. And of course, that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see sensible diplomatic deals done and these individuals released to go back home. And of course, number one on my list, I'm afraid, is Julian Assange, one of the greatest publishers this world has ever seen, still languishing behind bars in London and being told yesterday evening, nothing on the news here in Britain about it, hardly anything at all. He's being told that he cannot appeal to the Supreme Court, so he's going to have to go to the European Court of Human Rights. But it would be nice to see some justice for all these people involved.
All right, thank you, Tony. Stay safe, pal. It was a pleasure to check in with you. From Bristol, Tony Gosling there joining us.